Hey quilters, we are in the middle of our quilt along. We are doing Pinwheel Popper QAL using this pattern. We're going to make this lovely quilt for this quilt along. And for the video today, we're going to talk a little about pressing. This is going to be a two-part series. So the first video, we're going to talk about pressing these units right here and some of the things you could think about with that. And we're also going to look at a little trick for using a wooden cutting board to help you with your pressing and getting those blocks to lay flat. And here's what our block looks like. Look at this pretty block. So for the video tomorrow, we're going to look at pressing these seams when we sew the block together, and also some tips for getting really nice points on your pinwheel. So I'm just going to hold this up. You can see that there. Really nice points in our pinwheels. So let's get started. Okay, so here we are at my workstation. You can see lots of units that I've chain pieced. There's that cutting board. I'm going to show you what we're going to do with that soon. My original Pinwheel Popper quilt and some units. So we're going to talk about pressing these unit firsts. And I'm just going to be honest, I'm not a huge stickler for pressing. Not that I don't think pressing is important. Pressing can really help improve your piecing, but I'm not going to tell you that your way is wrong or my way is right. You know, just do whatever works for you. But there are a few things you want to think about when you are pressing. So a couple things you might worry about are reducing bulk and making sure that there are not darker fabrics showing through your lighter fabrics, or nesting your seams. And depending on the quilt pattern and the fabrics you use, the fabric placement that you use, you may not be able to get all of those concerns in. You may have to pick whichever one is more important for you, whichever one you are most worried about. So when I write patterns, I typically instruct the pressing with what I would do. But if you have another method that you like to use that works better for you, then do that. So let's look at these pieces. For this pattern, I got it instructed that you're going to press this unit towards this background piece. So you're going to press it away from the pinwheel. And the concern that that's going to address is it's going to address bulk at the seams. So if I push this seam in that direction, that seam right here is not going to be as bulky. Whereas if we push it this way, you've got a little bit of a bulkier seam right here. So for this quilt, my original quilt, you can see that even though the background is lighter than the green in the pinwheel blades, none of the fabrics are really, as far as the background versus the pinwheel blade, neither one of them are really light enough that you have to worry about fabric showing through. So pressing away from that pinwheel unit and getting the seams less bulky makes the most sense. But if you look at this one right here, I'm actually using a white background. So if you're using a white background or a really light background in your quilt like I am, you may be more worried about the fabric showing through than you are with the bulk of that seam. Now, bulk doesn't really scare me. I make a whole lot of t-shirt quilts, and you know, a pinwheel seam made in fabric that is all regular quilting cotton doesn't really compare to the bulk in a t-shirt quilt. So that's not really something that scares me. But you have to decide which one of these are you the most worried about. And another thing that some people worry about is nesting the seams. Now, nesting the seams is a trick that you need to press your seams to the sides in opposite directions. And then you can push those seams together and you'll feel like a little ridge where they're pushed together. And then when you sew that, that's going to help you get your corners nice. So you can see right here how well that corner adds up. It was the nesting the seams that helped me do that. Now, some people prefer to press their seams open, and they can get really nice seams that way, and that's fine. So let's look at the back of this one. So nesting the seams is not really something that you need to worry about with this seam, because when you look at this quilt right here, there is no spot in this quilt where this seam has to meet up with another seam. So for this particular unit, nesting the seams is not a factor to worry about, because this seam will not have to meet up with any other seams. So if you decide that you want to, if you need to, based on your fabric choices, press in towards that pinwheel seam, like have pressed toward the pinwheel, that's going to give you a little bit more bulk at this seam right here. But if you decide that's what you want to do anyway, that is what this cutting board is for. And the cutting board is basically, this is an alternative to a tailor's clapper. And tailor's clappers are great. They're not unreasonably priced. I'm not knocking tailor's clappers here. Just showing you this little trick in case it might help somebody. So what a tailor's clappers do, that is wood, and you will press a seam, and then you'll lay that clapper over the seam, and the wood will help absorb the heat from the iron a little bit slower than if you did not lay the wood over it, and that gives those seams more time with the heat to set nice and flat. But you need specific kinds of wood for a clapper, so you'll want what they call close grain hardwood, and so that's hardwood that doesn't have big pores. There's not, that's going to be a really smooth wood. If you use hardwood that is not close grain, then you're probably just going to end up cracking the wood in your clapper or whatever you're using to flatten those seams out. So popular choices for clappers are maple, tulip wood, cherry. Some hardwoods, even though they may be a really hard wood, would not be appropriate for a clapper because the pores are so big in the wood. So hickory is a really hard wood, but it would not be appropriate for a clapper because it's not close grain. So this is a really old cutting board, like probably 20 years old. And I'll be honest, it is so old that I don't really remember what kind of wood that was supposed to be, but it looked like maple to me. So I got the idea that I would try using this as an alternative to a clapper. And the nice thing about this versus a clapper, clappers are made to be held in your hand, so they're not as big as this. But the nice thing about this wood, this cutting board, as an alternative to a clapper is that, watch that, that covers the whole piece. So I could technically flatten multiple pieces at a time. So with this wood as a clapper, when I first started trying it, I would actually press a seam and then push my hand down to hold pressure. And the more I was doing that, I just wanted to kind of play around and experiment. I ended up getting kind of a rhythm going where I would place a unit under the clapper, put it down, leave it long enough for me to press another unit, and then by the time I pressed that unit, take this one out, the seam was nice and flat, and go through, and I was able to flatten a lot of seams like that. So that's kind of a cool trick that you might want to try. Okay guys, so here we are at my ironing board. I've got some units that we're going to press, and I've got my cutting board. And first thing I want to do is I want to set that seam. So I like to have whatever side that you are going to be pressing your blocks towards on top. So for this one, just to show you how well this cutting board does flattening those seams, I'm going to press towards the pinwheel just to show how well that flattens. And you can do whatever you want for yours, whichever one works best for you based on what we just talked about. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set our seam. So whatever side I'm going to press towards, I'll have that on top. And I'm just going to grab my iron and I'm going to hold firm pressure, not move it around. And I usually do put a little shot of steam in there. And what that's going to do for us is that's going to help set our stitches, and also if you have any tension issues with your thread, that'll help ease that. So once that's pressed, you can open that up and just kind of pull it back and press that seam. And then I'm going to lift up this cutting board and put the cutting board on top of that seam to set it. And while that is under the cutting board, I will work on my next one. And by the time I get the next one pressed and ready, then the cutting board, under the cutting board, then this one should have been under there enough. So let's set the seam, pull back a little bit, press, and then now I'm just going to move the cutting board over to the other one, move this unit out of the way, and then start working on my next one. Set the seam, kind of just open it up, peel it back, press, and you're just pressing at the seams. Got that a little wrinkled, so I'll press that. But now, move it over, and you see how nice and flat this one is after we did that. And then let's do our last one. Set the seam, peel it open, and just press that seam, and move the cutting board over to here. So you can see how you can really get into a nice rhythm of press one, put the cutting board over it, leave it there until you're ready for the next one, move the cutting board over, press the next one. So you can really see how you can get in a nice rhythm there. And you can see from the back how nice and flat that seam is. So these blocks are going to lay nice and flat for you. So I hope you liked this video. Hope it helped. And like I said, if you have a tailor's clapper and you like using it, just use that. This video is not meant to knock tailor's clappers. It's just something that I thought of one day, so I thought I would try it and see if it worked, and it did. So I just thought I'd share it with you in case it might help you. In our next video, we're going to have some tips for getting these points of your pinwheel to align when we sew our blocks together, and also some tips for pressing when we press our finished blocks.